Hi, Andre.
Hi, everyone. Hey, Monica. It's great to see you.
I brought a date along.
Hi, Ray.
Hi.
We're just going to give everyone another few seconds to get in, and then we'll get started.
Okay. From all over the place.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We have a special treat for you all. We are excited to bring to you Dr. Will Cradduck from our Fort Griffin State Historic Site. And he will be introducing you all to the State of Texas official Longhorn herd, and he will share some stories with you about the history of this herd, about the cattle drives, a lot of stuff. But before we get there, again, thank you all for joining us. This is our 7th in our series of virtual events that we are hosting throughout this year to celebrate the Friends of the Texas Historical Commission's 25th anniversary. Our hope is that through these events, you will get to know more about us, the Friends, and our mission to support the Texas Historical Commission in its preservation efforts across the state. And hopefully you will choose to support us in these efforts. I did want to especially welcome our colleagues at the THC, at the Texas Historical Commission, and our commissioners, Commissioner Burdett, who is on here, and other commissioners who may have also joined us as I started speaking. Thank you all for being with us today. I did want to also introduce our Friends of the THC team. Katie Kukerbaum, who is, Katie, can you wave your hand since there's so many of us on the screen? Katie is the brains behind these events. She is the one who pulls all of these events together, and I so appreciate all her work on that. Reina Andrade, who's not with us today, but she is the invisible force behind the scenes at the Friends. She keeps us doing what we do, supporting the Texas Historical Commission, and Hope Barron, who is our social media expert, who has been reaching out to you via Facebook at THC Friends, and on Instagram and Twitter at Friends_THC. And if you all are on social media on any of these channels, please follow us on these platforms. I will put the specific links, handles in the chat box here in just a minute. Before we get started, I also wanted to let you know about our next few virtual events. Our next event is on August 19th at 6 p.m. When we will have Texas Monthly writer and barbecue editor Daniel Vaughn talk about the history of barbecue. In September, we look forward to bringing you stories and information about marine archaeology. And in October, we are excited to have chef and food historian M.M. Pack talk to us about the history of pecan pralines. And in November, we are putting together a foodways program event focused on historic holiday recipes. So we hope that you will be able to join us for these events. Registration for the August event is open at www.thcfriends.org, and we will be putting up the other events on there as well. So please check in and register. We'd love for you to join us. For those of you that registered and have supported us with contributions, we truly, truly appreciate your support. Thank you so much. We are offering these events free of cost, but we really, really appreciate your gifts to help us do what we do. A few housekeeping items before I introduce our speaker in more detail. We would appreciate it if you can keep your microphones on mute, your cameras on. For the duration of the presentation, the first part, please switch your viewing option to speaker view. And you can do that by hovering your mouse to the top right corner of your Zoom screen. You'll see a view button. If you click on that, it'll give you a speaker view option. Please click on that, and that will allow you to see the speaker and everything that he is going to share with us clearly. And then once we're done with that and we go into the Q&A section of the presentation, you can go back to gallery view so we can all see each other. We can chit chat with each other and exchange thoughts and ideas. If you have questions, you're welcome to put your name or the question in the chat box, and we will call on you once we're ready for that. Or so you can ask your question yourself, or if you put your question in, we're happy to ask it for you. It is now my privilege to introduce our speaker for today's event. As you know, the Friends of the THC's motto is preserving the real places and real stories of Texas. So storytelling is key to the work of historic preservation. And like all of our historic site staff, our presenter today also combines his passion for his site and his work and for the storytelling to bring you today's event. Dr. Will Cradduck resides in Albany, Texas, and is a native of Aspermont, Texas. Will has managed the state Longhorn herd for over 10 years, I'm sorry, first as part of the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department and now at the Texas Historical Commission. And he has worked hard to maintain the herd and keep it historically correct. Will's early years were spent ranching with his family, and he continues to help with the family cattle operation. Dr. Cradduck attended Texas Tech University for a BS in animal science and an MS in animal nutrition, and he followed that with a PhD in agronomy. He then worked for Texas Tech, assisting with the Texas Alliance for Water Conservation project, working with cattle producers. I'm sorry, I'm trying to admit people into the room as I'm talking, so I apologize if you see me a little distracted. Dr. Cradduck currently serves on the board and is president of the Cattlemen's Texas Longhorn Registry, as well as serving on the board and as president of the Great Western Cattle Trail Association. Will also serves on the board of the Texas Fort Trail. Will and his wife, Nikki, have 3 children, Mason, 9, Dylan, 7, and Madeline, 3. Dr. Cradduck comes to us this evening from Fort Griffin State Historic Site in Albany. If you are in the area, if you live in the area, or if you're traveling in that area, please do go visit so you can learn more about the site, its history, and everything that Dr. Cradduck and all of the site staff work to preserve there. Again, before we start, please make sure you're in speaker view so you can see the presentation properly and well. Will, thank you for taking time to be with us this evening and for sharing your site and the stories with us, and it is all yours.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Hello from Fort Griffin and from Mill Creek. I'm right here on the banks of Mill Creek, right behind the old Jackson House on Fort Griffin State Historic Site. And what you see here behind me is part of the official state of Texas Longhorn herd. We keep part of the herd here at Fort Griffin and a large part of it at a nearby lease. The herd has been based at Fort Griffin since 1948, and we have almost all of the herd here close by Fort Griffin now. We keep a few steers at San Angelo State Park, Caldera Canyon State Park, LBJ State Park, and Copper Break State Park. We keep over 200 head in the herd. We raise them all from calves. And somebody commented you couldn't hear me. Can you hear me now? Okay, I see a thumbs up. Thank you, Katie. Okay, checking on audio. Don't interrupt me if you can't hear me. I'm out here and the audio is a little sketchy sometimes.
One moment, Will. I can hear you well. Anjali, can you hear him? Commissioner Burdette, can you? I wanted to just spot check and make sure it's not just me.
It's just not as loud as other speakers.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Bill Craig can hear him well.
Thank you. Just make sure to stay close, Will. Thank you. Keep going.
Yes, I'll stay right here. And hopefully the sun will get down behind the trees in a few minutes. So we keep over 200 head in the herd. We raise them all from calves, and these cattle are trace their lineage back to the first cattle that were gathered for the state herd by the state by Graves Peeler in the early 30s. So what we see here is about 10 cows, and then a number of young steers, young heifers, and a few older steers. The bigger animals you'll see that walk behind me are all older steers, and the medium-sized ones here that you can see right now are cows with their calves. Yeah, a little bit about the history of the state herd, and then we'll get into the Longhorns and get into some more history and some more stories and some fun stuff. But the state herd came from was gathered up by Graves Peeler, a retired brand inspector for the state, and he was hired by two gentlemen, J. Frank Dobie and Sid Richardson, to gather up a small herd for the state of Texas to help preserve the Longhorns. And J. Frank Dobie, the Western author, had come up with this idea a few years back in the early 30s, and he had pushed the idea through magazine articles and talking to people. Finally got the support of a businessman from Fort Worth called Sid Richardson. And Sid Richardson financed the operation. They gathered up 2 small herds of cattle and donated them to the State Parks Department, and that became the State of Texas Longhorn herd. The herd bounced around from one state park to another for a few years and came here to Fort Griffin when Fort Griffin opened in 1948. And we've had the herd based here ever since. You'll notice all these younger animals, you can see their brands a lot better. The older ones, not as well on video, but the young ones you'll see have a 5-pointed star on the left hip and a number brand on the right hip. The star is our state brand, and then the number brand is their individual ID. The number on the bottom will be the year brand, and the number on top is the order they were born in that year. So let's start back at the history and where Longhorns came from. Early settlers to this area found Longhorn cattle already here, and they called them Texas cattle or wild cattle. And they believed that the cattle had always been here, and they believed the cattle were native. And they found out many years later that the cattle were actually introduced by the Spanish. These cattle were introduced by Spanish explorers into northern Mexico and southern Texas, starting in the 1500s. And we have always told everyone that the cattle were exclusively Spanish origin, but now that we've done enough DNA testing, we can say definitively that they are over 99% Spanish origin and very little influence of any other breed. However, there are a lot of Longhorns in the world that are not preserved. So we think we have less than 3,000 head of historically correct, genetically pure Texas Longhorns left in the world. And we have over 200 of those here in the state herd. So the genetic resource is fairly small. So as these cattle spread north out of southern Texas and northern Mexico, they spread as far east as the Piney Woods, as far north as the Red River, and as far west as the High Plains. And as people moved into this area, they saw these wild cattle running everywhere. And soon, by comparing notes with friends and neighbors, soon figured out that there were cattle everywhere. They didn't run in large groups like the buffalo. They ran in small herds. So until people started settling and moving through the area regularly, it was really hard to document how many cattle were here. Turns out there were millions of cattle here, far outnumbered the bison. And early settlers started gathering these cattle up, claiming them for their own, building their own small herds. And the ranching was fairly unsuccessful for a long time. I think the biggest problem for a long time was the cattle were pretty cheap. The cattle only were worth $8 to $10 here at Fort Griffin. And if you wanted beef, you could go out and hunt down you a wild longhorn and have beef for your friends and family for many years to come, or many days to come. So a lot of people did that. Nobody really wanted to buy cattle. The Fort Griffin here bought a few head of beef a day from local ranchers to help feed the soldiers. But the good market was hard to come by. So as a few years went by, things changed a little bit. Railroads moved west, and when they got as far west as Dodge City, interest here increased to the point that ranchers started moving herd trails here in Texas. Was further east from here, around Fort Worth.
Will, may I interrupt you for a second? I think you may have to get closer to the computer because some people are having a hard time hearing.
All righty. Let me see if I can hold my head up. How does this sound right here?
It's a little better. You may have to speak a little louder.
All righty. As the years went by, these cattle got to be worth a lot more in Dodge City. And with the railroads there, they would buy as many cattle as the ranchers from Texas could take. So this was the start of the trail drives out of Texas. And they were buying cattle in large numbers, shipping them back east to a population that was really hungry for beef. And because of this, that's what started the trail drive from Texas. And Texas, over about a 25-year period, moved more than 10 million head of cattle out of Texas up the trails north to be sold, and also to be sold for beef, and also to be sold to other ranches. Some estimates go as high as 20 million. And regardless of the exact number, we do know it was the largest movement of cattle in the world ever. No one has moved that many cattle that far, that fast yet. And I'm going to pause for an audio check. How does this sound? Is this sounding a little better?
Anjali, you're on mute.
Maybe if you get to the other side of the laptop, to the right side of the laptop, I think that was sounding a little better.
Let's see if this sounds better. How does this sound over here?
About the same, I think.
Stand up and back. We were audio checking, I was farther away.
Yeah, not sure what's going on with the sound. Well, just keep going, Will. We'll if you can just stay close and keep going, that'd be great. Thank you.
We were talking about the start of the trail drives out of Texas. As these ranchers started moving cattle north, they started bringing them a lot of money back to Texas from the cattle, and it was kind of the start of a big change for this part of the country. It was a time right after the Civil War when funds were pretty short and jobs were pretty scarce, and these trail drivers brought money into the state from their cattle sales that built communities, built ranches, and really made Texas and the ranching industry here what it is today. So the cattle really changed the state in big ways. We think a lot of people call them the first oil of Texas, and that's in a lot of ways that's true because of how much money they brought in. By the 1920s, we had a lot of other cattle being introduced, and the Longhorns were not as popular. So they were not as popular as time went by for a couple of reasons. One, they didn't grow as fast and produce as much beef, and another was they didn't have to travel as far anymore. They were not moving cattle up the trail 10 to 15 miles a day anymore. All the cattle could be shipped locally on trains. So we didn't have to have cattle that could move easily and transport themselves. Talked to my cousin here probably close to a year ago now, and we figured up that if you had a trail herd of 2,500 average sized young Longhorn steers, that it would take you approximately 50 semi trucks to move that entire herd. Here at Fort Griffin during the spring and summer, we probably would have anywhere from 2 to 3 trail herds camped here at Fort Griffin on any one day. So can you imagine that many trucks moving through? every day. We don't have anywhere near that amount of vehicle traffic. I told someone a while back that if we still had to move that many cattle that far today, probably the most practical way to do it would still be with cowboys on horseback. And I really think it would, because it's almost impossible to move that large number of animals any other way. Most of the time, the trail drives, we're moving cattle 10 to 15 miles a day. These cattle will walk 6 to 8 miles a day in their normal grazing pattern. So a 10 to 15 mile trail drive is not out of the ordinary for them, and certainly not stressful and they would actually gain weight on the trip, especially if grass was good like this year. The cattle would gain weight as they went by, as they went up the trail. And the trail drivers could pick up wild cattle as they went. It was totally legal to introduce other cattle into the herd and increase the size of your herd as you went, as long as the cattle did not belong to someone else. So that was pretty common. A lot of dangers along the way. There's a lot of old cowboys talk about all the stampedes, and the stampedes were definitely worse the first couple of weeks. The cattle were not used to being grouped together and bedded down tight together, and they would. I'm gonna pause. We got a cow feeding herself out of the sack. Oh, she's shy. Put the camera on her and she left. But the first couple of weeks, the cattle were not used to this. They were not what they call trail broke. They would spook and scatter at any odd sound, especially at night in the dark. So I tell kids when we do programs, that was the worst part of the trail drive, trying to stop a stampede in the middle of the night, and your horse doesn't have headlights. It's totally dark, and you're actually trying to herd cattle by what you can hear and not what you can see. Especially if you've got a thunderstorm overhead, maybe you can see things by lightning as the occasional flashes of light. But it's scary enough just trying to feed these cattle and stay out of the way of the horns. I can only imagine how bad it would be in amongst 2,500 running longhorns in the dark. So that was a big danger on the way. Also, this time of year, as y'all well know, we've got lots of flooded streams and rivers. And thankfully, as you go north through Texas, a lot of those streams and rivers moved from west to east. So the trail drives were crossing them. So they had a decent source of water every 2 to 3 days, a reliable source of water. But a lot of times they were flooded as well. So trying to get cattle across these streams was a challenge. And that's where something like lead steers comes in. A lot of the trail drivers had what they called a lead steer, or 2 or 3 lead steers that they would use over and over and take them back home with them after a trail drive. And these steers were older steers that had been up the trail several times and were definitely used to the trip. And the other cattle could see them and follow them easy, and it made the trip a lot easier just to get everything else to follow these big guys. So the big steer you see in the background here, that is Rowdy. Rowdy is probably, his back is about up to my eyeballs. He's nearly 6 feet of shoulders. He'd make an excellent lead steer. He's about 12 years old. He's big enough everybody can see him. He's gentle, easy to handle. Only bad thing about Rowdy is if he gets more than a mile from the fort, he's homesick. I take him to Albany and put him on display. He will stand at the corner of the pens and bawl and look up the street until we go back to the fort. So big lead steers like Rowdy came in really handy. There was a young man called Bill Blocker who had a lead steer he called Partner, and he credited Partner for saving his life more than once. On one particular trail drive, they were crossing, I believe, the North Fork of the Arkansas. Anyway, they were crossing a flooded river, and Bill couldn't swim. Like a lot of cowboys, he couldn't swim. He just went across the river on his horse. His horse could swim well, and he was helping get this herd of cattle across the river, and the big steer was spooked and got out of the herd and knocked Bill off his horse and away from his horse. Bill couldn't swim. He was in danger of drowning, and his big lead steer Partner swam by, and Bill grabbed his tail, and the steer pulled him across the river and out of the water. And Bill credited the steer with doing that on purpose and saved his life. Of course, I guess in the middle of the river, the steer probably didn't have a choice if anybody grabbed his tail or not. But maybe true. And he also accredited partner for getting multiple herds of cattle across the Red River one day when nothing would cross. As you know, if the Red River's flooded, it's really wide. Not terribly deep, but it's so wide it's hard to see the other side. And he was trailing cattle with some of his cousins and uncles, and they got to the Red River. There were several herds there waiting to cross, and they couldn't cross. They couldn't get any of the cattle to start into the water because the cattle couldn't see the other side and wouldn't start into the water without being able to see where they were going. So Bill asked permission. He said, "Can I take take the lead steers and turn the herd around and go back and come again to the river and see if we can make them cross?" And his uncle said, "Sure, go ahead." So he turned the cattle around, went back a couple of miles, turned them around again, and got them what they called strung out. And the cattle were spread out in a narrow line, narrow file where there's not a bunch of them trying to swim at once. And as he approached the river, he made sure his horse was beside his lead steer partner. And him and his horse and the big steer all went in the water together swimming, and the other cattle followed. They got their herd across safely that day, and the story goes several other herds crossed safely that day as well, all because of one good lead steer. So it's things like this that the trail drivers knew how to do and how to understand that, or how to manage the cattle and move them up the trail, and it made their jobs a lot easier. As they went north out of Fort Griffin, Fort Griffin was the last resupply point before Doan's Crossing. Doan's Crossing crossed into what is now Oklahoma, was in Indian Territory, and things got fairly dangerous. A lot of the Indian tribes would come out and ask for woha or beef, and the smart trail drivers would pick out a big, pretty fat steer or two and give them beef, and they would have very little trouble from any Indians from then on. The trail drivers that were not experienced would give them a cripple steer or a thin steer, just thinking they could buy them off with something that was not of much value to them. And then they would get their horses stolen the first night, and the cattle would get stampeded the next night, and so on and so forth for a week or two, if they survived that long. So it was really good business practice to take along some, make sure you had some good fat steers to trade with the Native Americans as you went through their territory. Also, coffee and sugar was good trade for them. That's something they really appreciated. A lot of, let's see, other stories from the trail. One more, and then I'll switch to a slightly different story. A lot of the old trail drivers talk about St. Elmo's fire, or will o' the wisp, or ball lightning, or things like that. And those are all words for the static electricity that played across the Longhorns' horns and the tips of their horses' ears and the brims of their hats while they were in a thunderstorm. And they said the air would get really hot and heavy, and static electricity would be popping everywhere. And of course, their eyes were really well adjusted to the dark, so they could see just a little bit of static electricity. And it spooked a lot of them pretty bad, and they were pretty superstitious about electricity and lightning, and a lot of the trail drivers wouldn't even sleep close to their pocket knives or anything that was metal. They would make a pile of their metal articles and put it away from where they put the bedroll down. They were afraid of getting hit by lightning while they were sleeping. The cattle did really well on the trail. They trailed up the herd trailed up pretty well. They managed to move quite a few cattle. There was always a handful of steers or a handful of animals that wanted to go home. And this is a story about a steer that liked to go home quite a lot. And his name was Sancho. And y'all have probably all heard the story of Sancho. It's told lots and lots of places. I think I've even seen it on a state historical marker or two. But Sancho was a steer that he was a bottle calf. a couple raised him as a calf in South Texas, and as he grew up, he got to be a bigger pet and a bigger and bigger pet. And the rancher finally talked his wife into letting Sancho go up the trail because he was afraid Sancho was too big and he was going to hurt somebody. And they couldn't keep him in the yard anymore. And he was just too big a pest to keep around the house. So finally talked his wife into letting Sancho go. And I believe the story is they put Sancho in with the first of 3 trail herds leaving the ranch. Sancho escaped the first herd. The second herd caught up with him and put him in with their herd. He stayed with them for a few days, headed back home again. The third herd leaving, the cowboys caught him and put him in with their herd. And they actually had to rope and tie Sancho to a tree every night to keep him with the herd, all the way up to the Dakotas. They were going pretty far up the Great Plains, and had to watch Sancho every night to make sure he would not go home. Well, they got the cattle delivered, and part of their contract was to brand all the cattle to the new rancher's brand. So they did, and turned them all out on the range and made their way home. And the next spring, this rancher is out riding with his boss, and they're looking over the pastures and looking over the cattle and making some decisions. And his boss looks at him and he said, "Didn't y'all take Sancho up the trail?" He said, "I remember the stories of him trying to get loose." And the rancher says, "Yes, he went up there. We branded him and turned him out with the other cattle." Well, his boss says, "Look over there in that bunch of trees. Isn't that Sancho standing there?" The rancher said, "No, it can't be. He's 4 or 5 states away north." And they went and looked, and it was Sancho. He had made it back from the Dakotas, back to South Texas by the next spring. And they said he was not in bad shape. His hooves were a little short, but he was in good shape and good flesh. And they did not sell Sancho again. So that's a neat story about how their sense of direction and how well they can find their way from one place to another. They also have a really good sense of smell. This is a story about a cow that got separated from her calf and managed to find it. But how she found it is almost unbelievable. There was a small trail outfit here close to, I believe it was close to Albany. Anyway, they were rounding up cattle and moving them through the main roundup ground, and only moving a few miles a day, and really didn't have to move the cattle that far. So, but they had a large group, had a good sized group of cattle, moving them up back to the roundup ground. And some of the cows were having calves, and one of the cows got separated from her calf. And along about late in the day, one of the ranchers noticed that the cow was trying to go back and find her calf. He spoke to the cowboys about it, and they said, "Yeah, we think we maybe didn't get her calf this morning, and she's trying to go back and get it." So the gentleman said, "I know a shortcut back." He said, "I've got a little while till sundown." He said, "I'll take a fresh horse and go get the calf." So he did. He took off on his shortcut, went back to the previous night's campground, looked around. Sure enough, found the calf, bedded down. So he put the calf up on the saddle with him on his horse. Turned around, headed back to the cow herd by his shortcut, only a few miles, and got back. Well, then when he got back, he couldn't find the cow. Talked to his cowboys again, and sure enough, they said, "Well, the cow got too mad. She got loose. We had to let her go." And he said, "Okay, here, watch the calf, and I'll go back and look for the cow." So takes the calf off the saddle there and starts back to the previous night's campground, again, by his shortcut. And about halfway there, he meets the cow coming toward him. And he said she's in a fast lope. She's got her nose to the ground. And he moves over out of the way and just watches her. She never looks at him. She goes right by. And so he just falls in behind her, and she follows her back up to the cattle herd, and she goes straight to her calf, gets it up, starts licking it. Calf goes to nursing. It's definitely her calf. And so mother and calf reunite. How did that cow know where her calf went? Either one or two things happened. When that cow got back to where she left her calf, she either picked up the calf's trail and followed that trail over tall grass as the rancher had carried the calf in on his horse, or she associated the smell of that calf with the rancher's horse and then tracked the horse back to the campground. Either way, she's a pretty smart cow and had a good sense of smell. I always wondered how true that story was, and was talking to one of my friends a few years ago at a Cattlemen's Association meeting and Longhorn Association meeting, and we got off on the story of that, or off on the topic of that story. And he told me, he said, funny you should mention that. He said, we moved cattle several miles from one pasture to another a couple of weeks ago. And he said, we were doing some of it with horses, some of it with four-wheelers, but he said almost the same thing happened. He said, we got a calf separated and ended up going back and getting the calf on a four-wheeler. And same time the cow got loose, going looking for her calf, and managed to track the four-wheeler in without the calf touching the ground. So I think it's safe to say that's actually a true story. I've got a few stories with cattle here at Fort Griffin and out at the Leaf. One of my favorite ones is a big steer we called Old Paint. And the intelligence of these cattle is amazing. They can move through a set of pens without getting lost or stuck behind the gate. They can see the pens almost as a maze and work their way through it easily. Old Paint, I was loading him in the trailer one day out at our lease place, moving him down the alley up to the trailer, and we were going to a program, and we found out that, I noticed as I'm trying to load him, the wind is blowing really bad. So the trailer gate starts to blow closed, and the wind picks up, and sure enough, the trailer gate closes, almost totally closed. So I climb out from behind Old Paint and go to walk around him and go to open the gate again. And as I'm moving around him, I noticed he's still walking toward the trailer. So I just kind of stop and watch to see what happens. He walks up to the trailer, takes one of his big horns, pushes the gate open, and gets in the trailer. And then the wind blows the gate shut again. So it was fairly entertaining to see that big steer load himself and then stand in the trailer and wait for me to latch the gate. So he knew what was going on. He knew that the gate had closed. He knew that he needed to get the gate open again, and then proceeded to load himself and wait for me to latch the gate. A lot of our big steers really do like to ride in the trailer, and they're a lot of fun to watch them load. I always have people when we take cattle to programs, they want to stay around and watch us load cattle, and I tell them, watch close and don't blink. It takes about 30 seconds, and all I have to do is open the gate and get out of the way, and they will load themselves.
Will, we have a few questions that have come through. Would you like to take them now, and then you can continue your stories as well?
Yeah, that'd be great.
So Travis McIntyre asks, are there any other large herds like this in Texas, in Mexico, other states, or is this the largest herd of Longhorns, or, is there something somewhere else? And I'm guessing he's asking about, the sort of a herd that traces its history back to the original.
Good historic herds, there's very few. I know amongst the breed association that I work with, the Cattlemen's Texas Longhorn Registry, we are the largest herd by a fair amount, I believe. I think there's maybe one or two other herds that only register a few animals. The Wallace herd in South Texas used to have quite a few good historic cows. Wichita Mountains Wildlife Refuge is another public herd. It's a U.S. government managed herd up in the Wichita Mountains. And I know they have a good size herd. I think they have around 300, 350 head or so. But there's probably no more than a handful of other large herds that are close to this size. So it's a finite resource. There's not that many out there.
Yeah. And Edgar Case asks, how many cowboys were typically on a trail drive with how many head of cattle? I know you mentioned some numbers. Could you share those again?
Yes, a typical trail herd might be 2,000 to 3,000 head of cattle. A lot of numbers you see are a lot bigger than that, but what you're actually seeing is one owner might have about 3 herds on the trail all at once, and he would count them all as one. So that might be 2,000 each for a total of 6,000 head if you had 3 herds. And they would space them out a week or so apart where they didn't get mixed up and where they were more manageable to move. As far as cowboys, somewhere between 35 to 50 cowboys for over 2,000 head of cattle. Really small number from what you would think to manage that number of cattle.
And for the drive, did they take entire herds or just the steers?
Both. Actually, a little bit of everything. Couple of interesting things. The cattle that were going to market for beef were mostly steers. But as the Great Plains was settled and more ranches began to be established, Texas was their source for cattle. So there was a lot of herds moving out of Texas to sell cows and calves in various places up through the Great Plains. One big trail herd might have cattle contracted to sell in Dodge City for beef, and they might be also taking cows to 1 to 3 or maybe even more other ranches further up the trail. It got to be quite an enterprise as the years went by.
And Travis asks again, any predators attack the herd? Cougars, coyotes, wild hogs?
Not successfully, no.
Okay. They probably got run down, right?
Yeah, they can take care of themselves very well. We had here in historic Texas, we had, of course, our current coyotes, but we also had wolves, mountain lions, which we still have a few of those, mountain lions, jaguars, all capable of generally of being able to prey on a longhorn, even a grown longhorn. But with their horns and congregated in groups, they were fairly safe. I recall even one story of a fight between a grizzly bear and a longhorn bull, and the bear lost. To the point he didn't just lose; he was dead when it was over. But
Is that a fact? Is that a fact?
According to J. Frank Dobie, it is.
Okay. Okay. We'll take it as such.
Secondhand account. He got.
Yeah.
I have a quick story about it.
Yes, please go ahead.
Several years ago, we had a snowstorm on Christmas Day, and I had a few cows close to having calves. One of them was a heifer having her first calf out at the lease, and so I went out to check the cattle. I believe it was the day after Christmas, and we had all the cattle were there except for the one that was close to having a calf. So I checked them, and I went and found her. She was off by herself. She had a new calf. The calf looked good. She had the calf dry. The calf was nursed. But she was so nervous she couldn't stand still. So I poured some feed out off to one side and left. And then I came back 30 minutes or so later and checked on her. She had calmed down and she was eating the feed. Well, there's 2 to 3 inches of snow on the ground. So I'm walking around her and looking at her and the calf. And for 50 yards around her and that calf, there was not a square inch of snow that didn't have coyote tracks on it. She had had her first calf in the middle of a snowstorm, managed to get the calf licked dry, get the calf to nurse, and fought off coyotes all at the same time. And they were all fine. Her and the calf were fine. So I can imagine she was a little bit nervous. Probably hadn't slept in a few days. And so that's they can take care of themselves in a group, but they're also capable of really taking care of themselves pretty well by themselves without any help from other cattle.
A couple more questions. Let's see. There's a question. Bevo has to be the most famous longhorn. Does the official herd have steers of his size, or is he above average or a different strain?
He's actually average. We have some steers that big. They're not as typical. The bigger sets of horns are not as typical. We have most of our steers, when they're fully grown, will have a spread of horns around 5 to 6 feet wide. I do have one that's probably over 7 feet right now, and he doesn't fit in the trailer very well. But he gets stuck almost every time I put him in the trailer, so I try not to move him with the trailer. We've actually had several Bevos from the state herd in the past, but it's probably been 40 to 50 years ago. I think there was 4 to 5 different Bevos that came from the state herd.
Cool. a couple of our audiences and Commissioner Burdett would love for you to show us the herd more closely if you can, and then also show us their brand. And can you explain what that means? Somebody said their brand says 55/20. How does that read?
Yeah,
Can you?
I'll use that brand as an example, and then we'll go look around. 55/20 means that calf was born in 2020, and the 55 is he or she was the 55th calf born that year.
Okay.
We'll have
Does the herd have a sort of an official brand?
Yes, we have the five-pointed star is on the left hip, and that is our official brand, registered here in Sacramento County. I'm gonna try to climb the fence without dropping this computer. We'll see. Dub's here to. Appreciate it, Dub.
Okay. You want to put a little more cube, keep them around and make it good.
I think I'm good. I think they might run me over. Give me a handful before you walk off. Let me get a few in my hand. That'll work. Okay. Let me go find one of my pet steers. Some of these cows will probably get out of my hand too.
I have to say, I have met some of these guys and gals out at Fort Griffin, and they are.
Anjali, we lose speaker view. Hold on.
Oh.
Will, say something?
Yes, can you hear me? I guess
There
I
we
need
go.
to focus so it stays on me, right? Okay. This is Diablo. He's the opposite of what his name suggests. He's a big pet. Diablo is about 14 or 15 years old. He's eating out of my hand right now. And Rowdy over here is waiting his turn. He's too shy. I've got to go over and offer him a bite. And I can't talk real loud, or he's kind of shy. Okay, he got a bite. Y'all can get an idea of Rowdy's size. Perspective is bad. He'll stand behind me. All right, Rowdy is the old brand number, 851. We just had sequential brands up through the years until we got in the upper 900s. And then I changed it over to where we had a something that made a little more sense. There's Diablo again. He will eat cubes all day long. This is Young Gun. He's real shy. He probably will not eat. He's going to run from me as Diablo follows me. Yeah, here's the 55/20 calf. Trying to get around where you can see the new brand. There we go. There's the Star brand. He's only been branded about a week. On the other side, 55/20. There's a couple of our older cows. They're probably in their mid-teens, still in excellent shape, all having calves every year.
Well, can you remind me again, what was the size of the herd?
We keep about 200 head in the herd. When I say 200, that's about 200 adult animals. That's not counting our calves. So close to 120 producing cows. Then 40 to 50 steers, plus all the yearling replacement bulls, heifers, and steers as older animals pass away or animals that we sell. So yeah, 200 adult animals and then 50 to 60 calves at any one time.
We have a ton more questions for you. So the first one is, where do you get your genetic testing done?
Genetic testing, we actually test through the Cattlemen's Texas Longhorn Registry, and they have their own, and I will get it all wrong, but they have their own test. It's been developed for historic Longhorns. And I think the test is such that if a lab goes out of business, we can take that specific combination of tests and go to a different lab and say, okay, we want the same test done. And we managed to make it where it's consistent long term.
Okay. The other question is, can you purchase Longhorns from the state herd?
Yes, you can. We keep only a small portion of our cattle every year, so we will have some for sale. Try to get a picture of this cow and her calf. She's standing real nice and still for me. There we go. We do sell cattle every year, and I'll sell them when they're about a year old. And we've been rebuilding the herd the last couple of years after moving a lot of the breeding herd back from San Angelo. So this next year or two, I should have a lot more calves available for sale. I've about caught up on all the replacements that I need to keep as far as steers and heifers. So if anyone is interested, the best thing you can do is email me and tell me what you want, and tell me about what time of the year you would like to have them. And I just keep a running list of people that are interested and want Longhorns, and we try to get them what they want. And
that sounds great. Katie, if you wouldn't mind putting Will's email address in the chat box, that would be great. Next question, how do the mothers communicate with their babies, and how does the herd communicate with each other?
That's real interesting. They're a lot like human mothers. When that calf will walk around and forget where mama is, and it will bawl and bawl and bawl, and mama will not answer as long as she knows where that calf is and that the calf is okay. But when that calf's tone changes to, oh my gosh, something bit me on the foot, mama will come running, and usually the rest of the herd will come running with her. It's all based on what that sound that calf makes, or the sound the cow makes. And I swear I've heard the cows say, okay, get over here now, you little stinker. And here comes the calf running.
Next question from Scott. We have numerous Wichita Wildlife Refuge cattle we have bought at auction. So do you sell surplus? So Scott, I think you just heard Will's answer, and we'll have his email address in the chat box. So please feel free to reach out to him. From Paul, a question, were Longhorns used as oxen to pull wagons?
Yes, Longhorns were used as oxen. For those of you that don't know, oxen can be almost any breed of cattle, but historically, Longhorns were used as oxen quite a bit. Their horns really didn't get in the way, especially if you had a steer like Rowdy here. His horns mostly turn up. They're not overly wide, but they go out and up. So you could hitch him fairly close to another steer, and he really wouldn't interfere. He's walking away from me now that I'm trying to video him. But he would work really well as an ox. So yes, any big steer, an oxen. There's Rowdy.
Monica asks, what are some of the different characteristics between the original cattle brought with the Spanish and the Texas Longhorns of today, or are they very similar?
They are very similar. We actually now believe they're more similar even than we have believed in the past. What a lot of people thought for a number of years was that the cattle here in Texas over time changed a little bit. Everybody thought that their horns got bigger, and their try to get a picture of Vaca Rojo here. There she is. Their horns got bigger, their bodies got bigger over time. That's not exactly true. What happened was, as the Spanish cattle ran wild, the ones that were larger and maybe had a little bit bigger horns survived just as well as the moderately framed ones. So it wasn't really a change in the population. It was more of an expansion of the population to better resources. So these cattle are basically the same cattle that were introduced by the Spanish starting in the 1500s. Probably very little genetic change. One of the neat things about the cattle that the Spanish introduced, they were cattle that were native to Spain and really were not selected into specific breeds. All their color patterns and different colors were part of the Spanish cattle. So what you see now with the variation in colors and horn shapes, all of that originated with those Spanish cattle simply because the Spanish thought that that variety was something that should be there in their cattle, and they didn't select for any one specific horn shape or one specific color. And,
Great. Next question. We've got a ton of questions for you. Next one is from Michelle, who asks whether it's true that Longhorns have an easy time birthing a calf and don't need as much assistance as other breeds.
that is true. They very rarely have any problems having a calf. We have, I don't actually keep our cows up close when they have their first calf. We leave them out with the cow herd in the pasture. They calve with the cows. I have not had one had a problem that I know of. Everyone that I expected to show up with a new calf has since I started 10 years ago. And they just have almost no calving problems whatsoever.
Wonderful. And Katie asks, what is the average lifespan of a Longhorn?
Longhorns will live to be over 20 years old. We've had them live to be up around 25. Really common to have them in their late teens and early 20s. That which is about twice the lifespan of beef cattle.
Okay. And Paula asks, who picks the name for each calf? Is there a theme that you all like to stick to?
Well, they've got a variety of themes. Some of them are Fort Griffin related. I've got a steer or got a bull called Dark Sky. That's kind of a name that goes with our stargazing. Rowdy over here, we named him that because of how loud he is when we travel with him. Stands and balls all the time. So we name them for a variety of reasons. Some of them I name based on their history and their ancestry.
Raylan asks, do they all instinctively know how to avoid each other's horns or to avoid injury?
They do. Let me see if I can get Diablo to stand still. I'll tell you. Nope, he's gonna run away from me now. They do. They really can avoid their horns really well. Hang on a second.
Awesome.
I've got a steer running around behind me. They avoid each other's horns really well. One of the reasons is their eyes are kind of on the corner of their head, and each eye is kind of pointed out toward the end of that horn. So it really gives them a good view of where the end of that horn is going. And I think they're accurate within a half of an inch where they want their horn to be. Rowdy doesn't like me touching his horn, so if I get close, he's going to move away.
Bill Craig asks, how many breeding bulls do you have?
We've got 1, 2, 3. I've got 4 different breeding groups right now. 4 different groups of cattle that we breed separately based on their genetics. So I've got 4 herd bulls out with cows right now, and then I have a couple of younger bulls for extras and for replacements as we cycle out the older bulls. What we typically do is we'll keep a bull and raise several calf crops out of him, and then close to the end I will keep quite a few of his heifers. If he's a good bull, we'll keep quite a few of his heifers, and then we will sell or trade him off for another bull or replace him with a younger bull. And then I can keep those heifers in the herd because the bull they were most related to is now gone.
And Paul asks, are the ones you sell placed in a registry to keep track of purebred Spanish cattle?
Yes, we keep track of the bloodlines on every animal that we have, even the steers. And I register all of them in the registry for that reason. And the steers, it turns out, even though they're not breeding animals, I keep track of their pedigrees because they're one of the few animals that I get to keep around for a lot of years. And as I watch their development, I may realize how good or how poor the genetics are in their particular line. So I can use them as selection for the rest of the herd, whether I want to keep brothers and sisters of theirs.
Got it.
Diablo's a good example. We kept a brother of his based on really on how good he looks.
Got it. Jean asks, how many acres do they run on at Fort Griffin? Is grazing sufficient, or do you have to feed year round?
No, grazing is sufficient. Here at Fort Griffin, we only have a little over 500 acres, but we lease land at a nearby lease place, a few thousand acres out there. So we have plenty of room to rotate the cattle. We have to feed very, very little. I usually feed very lightly through the summer just to keep them gentle and where they'll come to feed. And then we feed more heavily through the coldest winter months.
Got it. And how do you manage their health? Ticks, is there a veterinarian that comes, checks them yearly, quarterly? What's the schedule?
No, we do most of our own veterinary work, which is actually thankfully fairly minor with Longhorns. We have almost no health problems with Longhorns. They're very insect resistant and very rarely get sick. So other than branding and castration when they're young, and that's really about the only veterinary needs that we have.
And the acreage that you mentioned earlier, that's one head per 10 acres, correct? About?
Here at Fort Griffin, yeah, that's approximate. One of the neat things about Fort Griffin is we're here between Mill Creek and the Clear Fork of the Brazos. So typical native pasture stocking rates really don't apply here. We have way more forage than the cattle will eat most of the year round.
Perfect. And Katie, you want to ask your own question?
Sure. And I think someone else just asked a very similar question, which is, do they ever get aggressive with people? The question that Paul just asked is, how dangerous are they? I assume that he means the same thing. Yeah.
No, they very rarely get aggressive. I tell people the most dangerous Longhorn is a cow with a young calf. And I've come close to being chased a few times. I have not had to climb a tree yet.
I can relate as a new mom, totally.
There you go. The important thing to remember is just kind of be on your guard when you're out around them. Watch what's going on, and they are protective of their young, but most of the cattle are used to people being out with them as long as it's not a huge crowd of people, and they're very tolerant of that. I tell people they're actually very intelligent. They're not going to get aggressive or mean unless you spend a lot of time really trying to provoke them and make them mad, or corner them where they really can't get away from them. They're always going to take the option to turn and run for the most part.
I will say, having met some of them when I was at Fort Griffin a couple of years ago, some of them are very friendly, and the others are kind of, I didn't want to get near them. So
they have a really wide variety of attitudes and dispositions.
They're beautiful, though. One more question, actually several more, but a quick question from Commissioner Burdett. How often is the herd taken to festivals for display?
Oh gosh, through the spring and early part of the summer, we're going somewhere 2 to 3 times a month. And then once school is out, things slow down because schools aren't doing programs, and we do a few things through the summer, and then we kind of finish off our busy part of the year with Pandangle in the last 2 weekends in June. And then the weather's so hot, we don't do much again until the fall. But the Living History and other local events start up again, usually about September. So we'll do quite a few events September through Christmas.
Got it. Kirk, you had a question, coastal. I'm not quite sure what you meant. Maybe you're asking if, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question, Kirk.
Maybe he was talking about their grazing, if it was coastal Bermuda grass, possibly.
Maybe that's what it was, yes.
He clarified,
Almost all
he
their
said type of
grazing-
feed.
There you go, yeah.
Almost all their grazing is native pasture. We don't have any improved pasture or fields that we plant. It's all native vegetation. The only their feed through the winter, the hay that we give them, it is Bermuda grass hay, and then protein supplement as well. Processed grain. Most everybody calls it cubes. 20% protein supplement.
Okay, and Raylin has a great question. She asks if the Longhorns are readily visible to visitors to the fort, or do they wander off into distant areas of the property?
They tend to wander off. A lot of times, if you're out here in the early morning or late evening, you'll get to see them because they'll come out of the shade and come out to the road and graze. But if you come through midday, they're going to be laying around in the shade, not extremely visible. So if you want to see the cattle, either call us, contact us ahead of time, or just stop at the visitor center and let somebody know that you really want to see the cattle, and we'll make sure that you get to see them.
Thank you. And Philip, that goes for you as well. Thank you for saying that you're going to try and make a trip to Fort Griffin. Please do. And as Will suggested, stop at the visitor center and ask to see the cattle. I'm sure they'll take you around. A question from Bill: are they resistant to rattlesnake?
They really are. I've had several snake bit already this year. Usually it's on the side of the face or on a lower leg. They will swell up a little bit, and I'll check them again a few days later, and usually I can't tell which one was bit. They are very resistant to snake bite, thankfully.
Thank you. I think that I've pretty much covered. Oh, Michelle asks, do they stomp the snake to death?
I don't know. I think they might if they had a chance. One thing I have noticed, if I'm out with the cattle, I mean, I'm walking around in tall grass with these cattle talking to y'all, and I'm not even thinking about snakes. The main reason is if there's cattle moving around, their weight and the vibrations of the large animals walking around, the snakes find a way away from wherever the cattle are. They're very careful to not get stepped on. I have called the cattle up and seen snakes move out of the way and disappear. It's kind of neat to see that.
Perfect. Raylin, we agree with you. They're beautiful beasts. They're absolutely perfect. If there are any other questions, please drop them in the chat box. But I did want to let everyone know we're past our allotted time. And I know people have other things to do this evening. Thank you all so much for joining us and joining Will at Fort Griffin. It seems like a beautiful day, hot, but pretty. Will, thank you for being out in the sun so long for us and sharing these beautiful, beautiful Longhorns with all of us and sharing your stories. We really, really appreciate it. And for everyone on this call, we hope you'll join us for future events. Will, any last words before we sign off?
Thank everyone for signing on and watching, and enjoyed it quite a bit. And y'all all come out to Fort Griffin and see us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. And we will sign off now and look forward to seeing you join us on August 19th. Take care.
Very good. Thank you.